Thank you very much, Andrew, for reminding us of the big picture. Unfortunately, we're woefully short on time now, so we'll limit our panel discussion to a brief 15 minutes, and then we'll give you a chance to jump in as well. I want to come back for a second to the practical aspects of digital technology in companies. Didier, from your work, can you give us one or two concrete examples how your digital masters employ digital technology inside their companies and why that works?
Sure. So let me get back to the example, because I mean, I can talk about Nike and Starbucks, but everybody knows this example. But the Codelco is the one that I like particularly because it's Chilean, so it's Latin America, it's mining, and it's government owned. So it's everything you wouldn't look at. So I mentioned the reason why they, it was led actually by, not by the CEO or the chairman in that instance, but by 2 or 3 individuals that had decided to do something different, and the trigger was what I mentioned, that they just couldn't get engineers to come to the mine. The young engineers coming out of university, which they needed plenty of, wanted to work in the main city. So that triggered a way of starting a first phase of actually getting, they say with the technology and the data and all the stuff we can do today, can we actually remotely manage a mine? And actually it turns out you can. From a glass building in Santiago, you can actually monitor the operations of a mine. So that was kind of a first phase, and they opened up this discussion quite broadly through innovation contests and all this kind of stuff to the labor force at all level, and came up with the next phase, which was more around automation. So they have these giant trucks on the mine. They all drive without people, which means there's no accidents and they're on time. They moved that from further innovation, which is basically putting sensors down the mine to try to understand what was going on. They're now in the phase of having, I think, 4 mines starting to run with actually no people underground, and it's a very dangerous business. And it doesn't mean, by the way, in that case at least, that the people have disappeared. They've actually retrained people to work overground, which is great. And it's not changing fundamentally, because if you don't have to put people underground, you don't have to build the tunnel the same way as protective, so therefore you can do them smaller, and therefore you can get to cache of ore, which were not economically viable before. So starting from a point where these guys were trying to get engineers in Santiago with a little bit of foresight, vision, and engagement of all the people, all the engineers and the operations people they had on the ground, they ended up with really changing fundamentally the nature of mining. And I'm sure there will be a phase 5 in their program. So that's an example of when I say all industry, it's not just B2C or B2B or whatever. This is an industry that you wouldn't have looked at first for this kind of drive. And it took basically a group of people and strong engagement of the workforce. And it's highly unionized, by the way.
What do you say from thinking back to Clay Christensen's talk from this morning? Is this a market-changing innovation, or is this an efficiency innovation?
I think I don't know where Clay can answer that, but I don't know where the organizational innovation side fits in that. It's not. This was more about trying to just change the work practices of what they were doing. It's really organizational innovation. So I don't know where it would fit in Clay. Certainly there was a bit of efficiency, the third block of Clay things. There were certainly new economic ways of driving extraction of minerals in that case. There was also completely different ways of working. I mean, remote, it was never done, and it's the only people in Latin America doing that, remotely actually running mines. It's very hard to do. So it's probably a mixture of, probably less the market side, because, it's minerals, so it's raw materials. Yeah.
John, off the top of your head, from your experience in the field, can you think of an innovation powered by digital technology that is transforming a market or creating a new one? Hard question, I'm sorry.
No, I think it's not so much creating a new market, but just to build on the application of technology. One of the companies that we've spent some time with is a company called LiveOps, which basically it's an infrastructure management business. They run customer call centers for larger companies on an outsourced basis. What's interesting about them is they actually have no call centers. They have 20,000 people who work for them, and they all work from their homes. So they've tapped into a labor market that has difficulty coming into an office whether they're parents with small children, disabled people, whole range of people who need to work from their homes. They've created a very sophisticated digital technology platform to route calls. But what's really interesting about them is two other things they did. One was they took inspiration from an online video game called World of Warcraft. And they created for each of those 20,000 people a real-time performance dashboard where they would give real-time feedback to that person along multiple dimensions of performance, how they're doing. Now, that in itself, I've been involved in high tech for 30 years. There's a whole category called business intelligence. And the whole focus of business intelligence, I'm oversimplifying a bit, but not too much. The whole focus of business intelligence is how do you get more information and data to senior executives and mid-level managers so they can control the front line more tightly, scalable efficiency. Radical notion. Business intelligence, why don't we put that information and data back to the front line? Feed it back to the front line, real time. Now, that's interesting in itself, but I joke also that if most traditional companies implemented those performance dashboards, they would be used as instruments of punishment, right? You're falling behind on these 3 performance metrics. You have 6 months to get your act together or you're out of here, right? LiveOps did something very different. They created a set of online discussion forums, and they invited the workers who were having performance issues to go in and ask for help. You know, I'm having trouble handling this particular kind of call. Does anybody have any ideas on how I can do it better? And what they did, which was particularly interesting, was they watched and rewarded, recognized and rewarded the other workers who were starting to give advice to the workers who were having performance issues. And so what they were doing was creating a very powerful peer-to-peer learning environment where the workers were learning faster from each other based on real-time performance feedback. I think that's a powerful transformation of how we think about work and how we think about scalable learning.
Andrew, how do you like that idea? People working from home, having a performance dashboard, teaching each other how to do their jobs better. Is there something wrong with that, or is that great?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I think, you could add the cultural critique that it's better for people to work together. You know, Marissa Mayer of Yahoo controversially recently argued in not that her company is such a great company, but that Yahoo people should work in an office. I think it's one of the ironies of digital technology that we have what I call the cult of the social in Silicon Valley. Everything's social: Facebook, Yahoo, networking. Everyone collaborates. It's another of the sort of the ideologies of this digital revolution is collaboration and working together and social. But actually, what all this digital technology is really doing, in the words of MIT's Sherry Turkle, is creating a world in which we are perpetually alone together. This technology is isolating. It's compounding our anxiety, our isolation. You know, Durkheim wrote about this at the beginning of the 20th century about industrial society. So this isn't new, and much of what the digital revolution is simply compounding many of the ills and some of the goods of industrial society. But I think when it comes to this idea of working from home and being able to collaborate, I think that one of the great values of our new age will be actual physical experience. What the digital revolution has done is commodified the digital. It's commodified the copy. So you see in industries like music, increasingly books, recorded music has no value. Over the last 25 years, the global recorded music industry has been cut in half from something like 36 billion to 18 billion. Now, the only answer to that is the live experience. So the only way to become a viable musician now, some of your kids may be, or there may even be musicians in the room. The only way to become a musician now is not to get a big record contract from the labels, because all the labels are essentially out of business. The only way to become a musician is to do live acts. So the physical now has real value. The digital commodifies the copy, and that's why events like this have so much value. So the ironic result of the digital revolution, and this again comes back to what Dov was talking about, is the kind of the reification of the human.
Isn't that nice, though? Isn't that a good thing? People going to gigs again, loving concerts, wanting to be
It's
near
great for
artists.
us as consumers. It's terrible for musicians, because that's not way to... Have you ever spent, 30 days on the road, sleeping in your van? The old world gave them security. The old world was one in which talent was nurtured and invested in. I mean, the labels weren't ideal, but they invested in talent. They had A&R guys who went out, found the raw talent, invested in them, paid for them to make music. Now, every musician has to become an entrepreneur, and a marketer. So you were kind enough to read out the advertisement for my book.
I'm not a marketer.
We all have to do. Creative people, and I think this will become increasingly true of professional people, we are all brands in this new world. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, just wrote a book called The Startup of You. So one of the consequences of the digital revolution is not only compounding the speed of capitalism and the global marketplace, but also fragmenting the old mass-based society which drove firms and the economy, fragmenting it, atomizing it, meaning that we all work on our own, and more of us are not going to, we all know the stories about how we're not going to work for firms, you're not going to go and work for IBM and spend 40 years there. The nature of work is dramatically changing by this digital revolution.
Let me come back to that point and latch on to John's example again. So Peter Drucker famously said, the means of production in the knowledge society is the knowledge of the knowledge worker. So in your example, what the knowledge workers are doing is they're leaving a digital record of their knowledge. Might not some of us be reluctant to strip ourselves of the means of production in this way? Do you know what I mean? Are we potentially, by inputting everything we know into databases for our colleagues or Watson at some point to read, aren't we working on making ourselves superfluous?
If knowledge were a fixed asset, yes. The interesting and I think powerful and exciting thing is knowledge is an ever-expanding asset. And that the real opportunity that's created by digital technology is not to share existing knowledge, it's to create new knowledge by working together. And I think that's a never-ending process. I mean, one of the things that I love, it was mentioned briefly earlier today, is what Toyota did with the front line of their assembly line operations. They said, look, yes, you have repetitive tasks, you're part of an assembly line, but no, your real job is problem solving. Your job is to identify a problem, not wait until after your shift is over and file a problem report. Solve the problem as soon as you spot it. And if you can't solve it, we're going to put a pull cord next to your station. You pull that cord, and the assembly line will come to a stop. And we're going to swarm you with a team of people to help you solve that problem. And you'll be a hero for having pulled that cord, because you found a problem that needed to be solved. So yes, and that solution to those problems gets distributed through the organization. But the real value is in finding new problems, new challenges, and learning, creating new knowledge together to do that.
The question is, for this task, will we in the future need as many people as we're employing today? Or if you believe Tyler Cohen or Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson, in the near future, in the next few decades, a lot of the jobs that the 67% of people who are taught not to think during their job that we heard about today, a lot of those jobs will become obsolete through AI, through robots, through self-driving cars, what have you. So we're moving into a society like the one Andrew has sketched so vocally. From your point of view, what are we, and that's a hard question for a short time to answer, what as societies are we going to do with the people that are hit like a ton of bricks by this development?
Well, first of all, I will say I will not in any way trivialize the transition because I think it's going to be painful and difficult. But my belief is that, and I wrote a review actually of Race Against the Machine where I challenged the formulation of the problem as a technology problem. I said it's not a technology problem, it is an institutional problem. The institutional problem is we have defined work to drive scalable efficiency. And if you want scalable efficiency, you need predictability, you need to tightly specify every activity that needs to be done, you need to standardize every activity, and you need to tightly integrate all the activities to remove those inefficient buffers. What have you just done?
I don't
You've defined...
Can you explain what that means? I mean, in terms of actual jobs, how would that change a job?
No, I'm not saying this is the way jobs are done today. It's that 67% where there is no independent judgment. You have a process manual and you follow your instructions reliably and predictably. You do not deviate. What have you just done? You have defined a computer algorithm. If that's the job to be done, computers can do that much more reliably and predictably than any of us can. So if that's the job, yes, those jobs are going to go, and I think that's great.
And they
because
should.
They should.
They should, absolutely.
Yeah,
because we need to find jobs that work on creativity, imagination, and human and emotional intelligence.
But I'll give you another example, because I agree with that. We've designed jobs to be automated, so we're putting it in the hands of the machines virtually. So first of all is we need to, in the next phase and starting now, redesign jobs that have much more decision-making, creativity, problem-solving, and so on and so forth. But there's a practical example. There used to be, so I can't name the retailer, but it's exactly using what John was talking about, but putting the information in the hands of the front line, where it's a lot of retail outlets selling food and stuff like that, and they had a very, very controlled system of operations. So basically, in the shop, you were told what to do. You stack the shelf there, you clock up the sales, and that was it. And then they changed it, so through a CEO, and they changed their system completely to actually put a lot of the data they had and a lot of the data they didn't have, like weather thing, in the hands of the people in the stores. And guess what happened? They also, by the way, integrated their supply chain so they could deliver 3 times a day, and you know who I'm talking about. And what happened there is that, first of all, the guys in the store, despite the highly, highly controlled environment, started being empowered because he had the data or she had the data and then could, if there was a football game or if the weather was not good, they could change what was on the shelf. So it gives a little bit more empowerment. And then they start talking to each other about what works and what doesn't work, the knowledge side of the equation. And that is an example of technology, digital data, and things actually empowering. And this notion, I think, this is what it's difficult to express, but this notion that we've built organization, or you control or you empower, you really tight process or you innovate. I think those paradoxes are breaking down because you can actually do both if you're smart. And that's kind of what I mean by digital transformation. That's why it needs leadership.
I take your point, and I think John, I love his work, and I've read all his books, and I think his point is a really important one. So in the old industrial age, we were, as John suggests, we were kind of robots. We worked in the factories. And most of us did jobs that could now, or are increasingly now being able to be done by computers. Okay, so that was the old world. It wasn't ideal, from my point of view, at least it created jobs. It created a mass society. It enabled the industrial state, it enabled the welfare state, and all the rest of the things we know. What I fear is, again, it's all very well talking about creativity. It's all very well talking about innovation. And those things will certainly be relevant in this great transformation. Those things will certainly drive this new world. But what I most fear, and this is what I think Tyler Cowen's book, Averages Over, is so important, is that this new creative class is going to be a tiny group of incredibly talented people, like Tyler himself, like all of us. There's going to be a serf army of people who somehow work for the machines, and everything in between will be decimated. Where do we rebuild the middle in this new world? That's what I don't understand. Where do most people work? The 67% of people who are currently unhappy. They may be unhappy in their job, but they're going to be a lot more unhappy when they don't have anything to do.
I think, Andrew, the answer, you know the answer to your own question, I guess, but you have to start by to me, one of the most important points, which is education. Because the other data we do have is that you can actually change things for education. So we live in a world where at the same time we say, oh my God, nobody's going to have jobs, and I hear everybody in industry saying, oh my God, the skill shortage is huge. So it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But we got to change that somehow. And education is where you start. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, okay? And there is a pain in the transition for sure.
Well, I always have a joke. We always have these kind of conversations. And the final conclusion always is, oh, education is a solution. McAfee and Bryn Johnson do the same in their book. Because no one has a solution. And the problem is, firstly, the education system itself is part of the problem. It's being revolutionized. So we don't know how to figure that out. But the other problem is that the things you value, innovation and creativity, can't be taught. Peter Thiel understands it. He pays the smartest kids in Silicon Valley $100 grand to leave university. So I'm very, very skeptical of education as a solution. I don't know what you think, Joe.
We agree on many things. This is clearly one of them. Our educational system was designed to feed people into the factory system, to follow orders reliably and predictably, and take tests to prove that they've mastered the knowledge they have. That is an educational system that is fundamentally broken and will need to be changed. And again, I do not want to trivialize the transition. I think it's going to be very painful, and it's going to be extended, but I'm an optimist. I believe we will transit, and we will all, as human beings, achieve more of our potential and possibility in this new world.
Maybe our audience has some suggestions, or at least tough questions for the panel. There's a gentleman back there, and over here. I don't know where the mic is. Maybe you go first up here. Go on. And to just quickly introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Abhinav from India. I apologize in advance. I have two questions. I'm going to rest the diary on your shoulder. The first question is for Andrew. I really liked your arguments, but don't you think you've taken them a little too far? Because digital technology can be used in governance also to make systems incredibly efficient. To give you an example, the town of Hun in Spain is entirely connected by Twitter, has increased accountability multifold. In India, we're introducing a new system called the Unique Identification System, which is aimed to reduce corruption and increase accountability, increase resource allocation. So that's my first question. Don't you think that when you say governance is key, digital technology can also be used to better governance? My second question to John Hagel. You said that there are jobs that computers can do much better than us, and I agree. But don't you also think that there are computers taking over jobs that should inherently be done by humans? Example, teaching. I know of an educationist called Sugata Mitra who said that if there's a computer that can replace a teacher, it should. And in that case, I'd say, aren't we taking away from our responsibility to actually make teachers more creative and innovative? Because, I mean, look at this conference, and I could maybe hear everything that you guys had to say on YouTube, but this physical interaction and having to talk to you personally, getting the opportunity to ask you a question, cannot be replaced by a computer. So what do you have to say about that?
John got the more interesting question. Yeah, and some people know me here. I never exaggerate. This is a big issue. This is an important issue, right? This is the great transformation. We need to have a serious debate about it. We're beginning to. This kind of conversation, books by people like Thiel and McAfee and Bryn Johnson, my own book, Nick Carr, a lot of people are beginning to think about this. I think it's important enough that there needs to be a sort of a polemical element. I could have given you a speech and said, you know, I couldn't have written this book without email. We all know the value of digital technology to us personally in terms of our efficiency. I don't actually even agree with John on necessarily the way in which it sort of alienates us at work. But I could have given you on the one hand, on the other hand kind of response. But I don't think that's that interesting. I think we need to have this debate. Just as we need, I just talked to Walter Isaacson a couple of weeks ago. I did an interview with him for my Techonomy show. And you know, he raises the historical dimension of Lord Byron as a Luddite in the 19th century. And ironically enough, his daughter being Ada Lovelace, who essentially invented programming and software. Byron made a very famous speech in, I think it was 1812, in the Houses of Parliament against the machine. We need to have those debates. Doesn't mean we smash the machines, but it is important to have this conversation. I can't think of a more important debate conversation about anything at the moment. So.
Sorry, we are running out of time, so please, preview. Yes, I know.
What about John?
John.
I'll just quickly respond to the question about eliminating jobs that shouldn't be eliminated. Again, to be provocative, and I don't mean this universally, but I will say that the way teaching is done today, it should be done by machines. Machines are far better at teaching the way we teach today. If, on the other hand, the goal of an educational institution is to help students discover their passion and pursue their passion, that's not something a machine can do. But that's not what most teachers are involved in doing. So again, I think we need to redefine the task at hand and figure out what are the tasks that we human beings are uniquely equipped to do.
I think we'll collect 2 or 3 more questions. There's one back here, one up here, and one back there. Sorry, two back there, so it's 4. Please keep it very brief. We started 5 or 10 minutes late, so we'll overrun a little bit.
You can break
back
the
there.
rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the transition we are in is stochastic, so it's happening. But do we have some ideas how to smooth the transition?
Anyone? How do we smooth the transition? Any ideas?
Well, I think I've given my view, at least for corporations and the people, some of the people within it. I think the points that Andrew raised are, you know, a bit more difficult to solve, like overnight through a cookie cutter, and you know, they're more at the societal level. So I don't think. Yes, there are ways, but I think, you know, we have to. It's going to be, as in all these kind of transition. If we really believe it is a great transformation, and I do, and Andrew seems to do, and John seems to do, you're going to have a painful transition somewhere, by definition. So it's our ability as human beings to think through and creatively about how we transition corporations, but also education, but also a whole pile of other things that you know, is going to make it less painful. But it's a big transition for sure.
Let's collect 3 more. Who's got a mic now?
I'm sorry.
I have a mic.
Sorry. Yeah. Go on.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. Thank you for that. As there are a lot of entrepreneurs up there, I have a question for you personally. There's something special about being an entrepreneur. You have these ideas nobody else can see and visions nobody else can follow. But how do you feel about that when your visions are neglected by data and technological indicators that tell you that it's not a good idea, even though you solely are very, you're very sure that it's a very good idea? How do you react to that? And if we are moving towards a society where everything is data-based and everything is measurable, don't we lack the personal freedom to, and freedom for creativity to be entrepreneurs in the way it has been? Or do you think that this will change as well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Another question? Who else got a mic over there?
So my question's kind of long, so I apologize for that. But and actually, first a comment to Andrew, who is just a bit of a response around some of the gloom around the collapse of the middle and whatnot. But I think one counter view is that there's a variety of different companies, and in particular web services firms, that I think are empowering local businesses and entrepreneurs and boutique firms unlike ever before. So there's been an explosion of boutique jewelry dealers being able to reach new markets online because of a company called Etsy. YouTube has empowered a whole new generation to create a bunch of content to compete with TV networks in meaningful ways and create substantially meaningful businesses. Twitch TV is a platform for streaming, which of course is very popular with online games, that has created lots of people who make tens of thousands of dollars a month, et cetera. There's also, of course, eBay, Amazon, the Apple App Store. All of those mechanisms, I think, are examples of how to empower and democratize people where they can, essentially, great content can go reach new audiences, because with the digital transformation, distribution becomes more commoditized. So if you can create great stuff, then you can reach lots of people. But one dependency there, to your point around can we teach people to create great things from a creativity standpoint, I would argue that children, we actually teach people to be not creative through our education system, and actually children are extremely creative, and we beat it out of them over a long period of time. So I think if we tweak our education system to be more creative, we can do a lot better job there. Apologize for the statement, but, and then John, one quick question for you. So you mentioned that there's sort of the three different models, the high volume routine process model, the creative product and process innovation company, and then companies which of course focus on customer relationships as part of the core business. But how does that work in the web services business where there's been a trend, of course, towards vertical integration, and even with a company like Apple, which has now opened retail stores because they want to control and ensure a great user experience across all the different touch points. How would you sort of reconcile those types of businesses, say Facebook or Salesforce.com or Netflix, where we just talked earlier about how Reed Hastings, not only did he have to create great products and of course continue to pivot and adapt products, but when he screws up, needs to interface directly with the customers and ensure they have a great experience. How do you think about that as it relates to the model you articulated?
Thank you. A statement and a question. One more question, and please really keep it short. Maybe if we have a lady, I would love to hear from a lady from the audience.
Hi,
Yes, please.
I'm Divya. I'm a finance PhD student, so my question is a little bit on the finance side. Basically, I just wanted to ask that we talked about Facebook acquiring WhatsApp for $19 billion. So do you think it's justifiable to have such a higher valuation for digital companies? Or do you see a trend of consolidation happening for such players? Or is it the rise of another bubble which might burst later on? So just your opinion on that point.
Thank you. So the first question was, if I abbreviate it, will data destroy entrepreneurial creativity? What do you think?
I totally disagree with that, and you guys are ex-entrepreneurs, because if you meet entrepreneurs, the first thing, so they are not driven by data and stuff like that. Au contraire, they envisage a service, and what's really interesting with them is they assemble. I mean, yesterday somebody talked about assembling several technologies. That's exactly what they do. They have this creativity of assembling something and looking at the world differently. And I have very rarely seen somebody. Now they may get completely wrong, and then they start again. But I very rarely see entrepreneur being, encumbered by data or some of these guys are actually starting data business in a very creative way, and that's kind of what I see out there. And again, these if it doesn't work, they'll start something else. So I don't recognize that limitation and constraint.
Thank you.
John, you guys have started companies.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what's going to be, we always had Watson doing quiz shows. What's going to be really interesting is the first computer that is an entrepreneur. And I think that will be a cultural shock, and it will come.
Bold vision. John.
No, I would agree with Didier on this. My belief is entrepreneurs, and by the way, I believe all of us have the capability of being entrepreneurs. It's not some unique class, but it's the creativity and imagination that goes beyond the data. I would say the discipline is for the entrepreneur to rapidly iterate and take the data from those iterations to refine and focus more effectively on the opportunity, the imagination that they've had. So to me, that's the real skill of an entrepreneur.
Something on the second question, John?
The second question about the three different types of businesses and why aren't Apple and Facebook and a bunch of others unbundling. To be determined. My belief, and we can revisit this 10 years from now, is they too will unbundle. They just are not feeling the pressure in the same way in the short term, and they have a lot of cash, and they're using the cash to do lots of things that I think ultimately they're going to have to make choices about.
And the last question sort of ties up everything we've talked about here today. Thank you very much for that question. So is WhatsApp a company that employs, I think it is 55, not 15 people, really worth $19 billion? And if yes, why? All three of you.
Well, actually, I think the WhatsApp acquisition ties back to what another subject that's been important at this event, which is short-termism. Because, of course, what happened with Facebook was that they went public, they amassed a huge base of users, 1.2 billion, but it's not entirely clear how viable their business is. And they're being forced by, I think, the markets to desperately acquire new businesses. So I think the common assumption in Silicon Valley is that the WhatsApp acquisition made sense to Facebook because Facebook has to try and compete with Google, but it's an insane valuation for a company that, you know, what's even more striking about WhatsApp, which is even more shocking than the fact that there are only 55 people working for it, is it doesn't have a business model. It's all free, it's essentially free. And Facebook doesn't really have a business model either, apart from giving away their stuff and then using data to follow their users, turning their users into products. So I would say that the WhatsApp acquisition and the kind of hysteria in Silicon Valley is the ultimate expression of the short-termism of our current economic circumstances. And I think it comes back to what someone was saying, you know, how do we make this less rocky, less painful? And I think the answer is that the market doesn't work. We've left it to the market, and this is what's happened. The outcome of the market are $19 million acquisitions of technology companies without any employees and without a business model. So we need outside supervision. We need to learn from history. The solution, I think, is political as much as economic.
Didier, what do you think?
No, I mean, this is by no means a new problem. I remember looking at the valuation of a cable company per users back in the 90s, and it was exactly the same. You went from £400 or dollars to insane valuation. So that's really nothing new for me. I mean, as you say, like, somebody must have seen something. And that to anybody else, it's completely irrational. The only question I would make with WhatsApp is what you said, is not only does it not have a business model, it doesn't have any sales either. So it doesn't have anything really except a user base. And which is, by the way, I don't want to criticize that, because the way that most of these businesses were built by actually increasing the business base, the base with no revenue, and then you start building your business model. Whether they will be able to do that with WhatsApp, I don't know. Or is it just that, you know, they don't want to see anybody sort of competing too close and you just snap it, which could happen as well. But from any financial measure that we know, it looks quite a high price to pay for a company like this, yes.
You wouldn't have paid 19 billion.
Not with my own money, that's for sure.
John.
I will defer from offering opinions about valuations of individual companies.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Richard Schrauber has a few organizatory remarks in a few seconds. I still want to thank John, thank Didier, thank Andrew, and thank this lovely audience for listening. Thank you.